Greetings to you all, and welcome to today's teaching. Leviticus 18 is often reduced to a chapter about sexual rules. But symbolically, the chapter is about boundaries, alignment, order, discernment, and what happens when things that were never meant to be joined become joined. In many ways, Leviticus 18 asks, what belongs in the house? And equally important, what does not belong in the house? This is why it comes immediately after the Day of Atonement. Because once the house has been restored, wisdom must now guard what enters it. A healed house still requires discernment. A restored sanctuary still requires wisdom. An awakened consciousness still requires boundaries. So with that in mind, let's enter Leviticus 18. But we will do 1 to 16 today and finish up tomorrow. So let's begin. Leviticus 18 verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, at first glance, this seems like a simple introductory verse. But after everything we've seen in Leviticus, even this opening statement carries significance. Notice that the source of instruction remains the same. The Lord speaks. Moses receives. Moses will transmit. The people will respond. The pattern hasn't changed. This is important because Leviticus 18 is not introducing a new God, a new principle, or a new agenda. The same voice that guided the sanctuary, the altar, the cleansing, and the restoration now speaks about relationships and boundaries. This is important. Many people unconsciously separate spiritual life from everyday life. They think God cares about worship, but not relationships. God cares about rituals, but not daily choices. Leviticus refuses that separation. The same wisdom that restores the sanctuary now addresses how life is lived. Next, the Lord speaks to Moses. Again, Moses receives first. Moses represents revelation, awareness, higher understanding, or insight. Before anything changes externally, awareness comes first. Awareness always comes before transformation. Now a new section begins. And once again, it begins with awareness. Next, Speak unto the children of Israel. Most people read this simply as an ethnic or historical reference. But if we stay consistent with the symbolic language we've been uncovering throughout Scripture, a deeper layer emerges. Remember, Jacob wrestled with the man throughout the night. The struggle ended at daybreak. And after the struggle, his name was changed from Jacob to Israel. A name change in Scripture often represents a change in consciousness, a change in identity, a change in awareness, a change in how one sees reality. Jacob represents the struggling consciousness, the divided consciousness, the consciousness wrestling with truth. Israel represents the consciousness that has passed through the struggle and emerged transformed, awakened, aligned, and seen differently. It's an awakening. In other words, being born again. Now think about the phrase, children of Israel. Children are expressions, manifestations. What comes forth from a nature? What proceeds from a source? Just as children of light are expressions of light, children of wisdom are expressions of wisdom. Children of the kingdom are expressions of the kingdom. Children of Israel can be understood symbolically as what flows from awakened consciousness, or what is produced by transformed awareness. It represents the thoughts, actions, relationships, choices, and expressions that emerge from that awakened awareness. This makes the opening of the chapter incredibly powerful. God is not merely speaking to a nation. He is speaking to what emerges from awakened consciousness. He is speaking to the expressions that flow from a restored house. He is speaking to the manifestations of transformed awareness. What did Jesus say? Except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. So God is speaking to the manifestations of transformed awareness. The Exodus is about awakening. It's about being born again. That's what it's about. Scripture is about consciousness. Scripture is not about fear-based religion. No. It's about awakening. It's about being born again. Verse 3. After the doings of the land of Egypt, wherein ye dwelt, shall ye not do? And after the doings of the land of Canaan, whither I bring you, shall ye not do? Neither shall ye walk in their ordinances. This verse is incredibly important because it reveals that awakening is not merely about leaving one place. It is also about not becoming trapped by the next place. Egypt and Canaan appear together. Most people focus on Egypt. Few notice that God mentions Canaan in the same sentence. Egypt represents where they came from. Canaan represents where they are going. And God says, do not become like either one. That should make us pause. Because many people assume Egypt bad, Canaan good. Yet the text warns about both. Throughout scripture, Egypt consistently represents bondage, limitation, unconscious patterns, identification with the outer world, and survival consciousness. The place where the house is not free. The place where awareness is asleep. The place where life is governed by external masters. This is extremely relatable. A person trapped in fear, shame, people-pleasing, or self-rejection is living in an Egypt of consciousness. The house is not free. But then Canaan appears. This is where it gets fascinating. Canaan is the promised land, the destination, the place of inheritance. Yet God still says, do not do as they do. Why? Because a new environment does not automatically create awakened consciousness. You can leave Egypt physically and still carry Egypt internally. And you can arrive in Canaan physically and still become unconscious there too. The issue is not geography. The issue is consciousness. This is extremely relatable. Someone leaves a toxic relationship. That's wonderful. But if they haven't changed internally, they often recreate the same pattern with a different person. Egypt was left, but Egypt remains within. Or someone lives a controlling religion. That's wonderful. But then becomes equally dogmatic in a new belief system. Egypt changed clothes. The consciousness remained the same. Next, neither shall ye walk in their ordinances. Notice the word walk. Throughout scripture, Walking often symbolizes a way of life, a pattern, a mode of consciousness. The warning is not merely about individual actions. It's about adopting entire systems of thinking, entire patterns of living, entire ways of perceiving reality. This connects beautifully to Jacob becoming Israel. Jacob wrestles. He is transformed. He becomes Israel. Then we encounter the children of Israel, the expressions of awakened awareness, the manifestations of transformed consciousness. Now, God is speaking directly to those expressions and saying, do not simply imitate what is around you, whether it comes from Egypt or Canaan. This is one of the greatest lessons in awakening. Many people move from one system to another, one ideology to another, one religion to another, one community to another, but never actually awaken. They simply exchange one conditioning for another. Leviticus is warning against that. This is extremely relevant to deconstruction. Some leave Egypt, but instead of awakening, they simply adopt a different collective identity. The bondage changes form. The consciousness remains unexamined. Leviticus is asking for something deeper, not imitation, awareness, not conformity, discernment. The first warning is fascinating. Don't allow Egypt back in, but don't blindly copy Canaan either. It's saying, think for yourself, see clearly, remain awake. The deep principle. This verse teaches that awakened consciousness is not defined by where it came from or where it is going. It is defined by what governs it. Egypt cannot govern it. Canaan cannot govern it. Culture cannot govern it. Tradition cannot govern it. Fear cannot govern it. Truth must govern it. And that is why God mentions both Egypt and Canaan. Because the awakened mind is not called to blindly imitate the past or blindly imitate the future. It is called to walk in awareness, to discern, to remain awake, and to allow truth, not environment, to govern what flows from the house. Verse 4. Ye shall do my judgments and keep my ordinances to walk therein. I am the Lord your God. This verse is the direct answer to the previous one. Verse 3 said, don't walk in the ways of Egypt. Don't walk in the ways of Canaan. Now the natural question becomes, then what should guide us? And verse 4 answers, ye shall do my judgments and keep my ordinances to walk therein. Notice the contrast. The verse is not saying, follow Egypt or follow Canaan. It is saying, follow truth. This is important because Leviticus is not asking Israel to become anti-Egyptian, nor is it asking them to become anti-Canaanite. It is asking them to become aligned. This is extremely relatable. Many people define themselves by opposition. I'm not like them. I'm not part of that group. I left that belief system. But awakening is not merely leaving something. It is discovering what actually governs your life. Next, my judgments. Many people hear the word judgment and immediately think punishment. But throughout scripture, judgment often means discernment, right evaluation, seeing clearly, and distinguishing what produces life from what produces suffering. Think about it. A judge's first responsibility is not punishment. It is discernment. To see clearly, to evaluate accurately. God's judgments can be understood as the principles of reality, the way life actually works. Next, keep my ordinances. An ordinance is a pattern, a principle, a way of living, not merely a command, but a way of aligning with life. God is essentially saying, don't organize your life according to Egypt. Don't organize your life according to Canaan. Organize your life according to truth. Next, to walk therein. Notice the word walk appears again. This is important. Truth is not meant to be admired from a distance. It is meant to be walked, lived, embodied, and practiced. This is extremely relatable. Someone can read hundreds of books about health, but eventually they must walk it. Someone can study relationships endlessly, but eventually they must live it. Someone can listen to teachings on awakening for years, but eventually they must embody it. That's walking. I am the Lord your God. The chapter repeats this phrase. Why? Because every instruction is anchored in identity, not fear, not coercion, but identity. If Israel represents awakened awareness, and the children of Israel represent the expressions that flow from awakened awareness, then this verse becomes incredibly powerful. The source is speaking to the expressions of awakened consciousness and saying, let truth govern what flows from you. Not culture, not tradition, not popular opinion, not collective conditioning, but truth. This is extremely relevant today. Many people are unconsciously governed by social media, political tribes, religious tribes, cultural expectations, and fear of rejection. Leviticus asks a different question. What is actually true? Not what is popular. Not what does my group say. Truth itself becomes the standard. This connects beautifully to Jacob becoming Israel. Jacob wrestled until dawn. He didn't inherit awareness. He wrestled into awareness. Then came Israel. Now God says, walk in my judgments. In other words, continue walking in awakened awareness. Don't return to unconscious living. Don't drift into borrowed thinking. Remain aligned with reality. The deep principle. This verse teaches that freedom from Egypt is not enough. Arrival in Canaan is not enough. The question is, what governs the house? Because whatever governs the house eventually governs what flows from the house. Truth must become the foundation. Discernment must become the guide. Awareness must become the walk. And that is why the verse ends exactly where it began. I am the Lord your God. Remember the source. Remember the center. Remember the mercy seat. Remember what restored the house. Because when truth governs the house, what flows from the house begins to reflect awakened consciousness itself. Verse 5. Ye shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, which if a man do, he shall live in them. I am the Lord. This is one of the most important verses in Leviticus. And it is a verse that Paul later quotes in his letters. Most people read it as obey these rules and God will reward you. But if we stay within the pattern we've been uncovering, something much deeper appears. He shall live in them. Notice what the verse does not say. It does not say, he shall die for them. It does not say, he shall suffer through them. It does not say, he shall endure them. It says, he shall live in them. This is a huge clue. Because the purpose of these principles is life, not burden, not oppression, not fear, but life. This connects beautifully to Leviticus 17. Leviticus 17 kept bringing us back to one theme: life. The life of the flesh is in the blood. Now, immediately afterward, Leviticus 18 says, he shall live in them. The flow is intentional. Life is still the focus. What does it mean to live in them? This is profound. Notice it doesn't say memorize them or recite them or debate them. It says live in them. This is extremely relatable. Think about honesty. Honesty is not merely something you believe, it's something you live in. Think about integrity. Integrity is not merely an idea, it's a way of being. Think about love. Love is not merely a concept, it's something you live in. That's the language Leviticus is using. The statutes and judgments again. Notice how both appear together. Statutes and judgments. Patterns and discernment. Principles and understanding. Structure and wisdom. Leviticus consistently joins the two. Because truth is not blind obedience. Truth involves understanding how life actually works. Leviticus 18 says, live in these principles. Notice how practical this is. These are not abstract theological ideas. They are principles for living. This is where Paul is often misunderstood. Paul quotes this verse, and many people assume Paul was attacking the Torah. But look carefully at the verse itself. The purpose is life. Paul's argument repeatedly revolves around the same issue. When Paul said, we are no longer under law, but under grace, many read it as Paul is saying, throw the law away. Jesus came to fulfill it. But Jesus himself said, I came to fulfill the law. Jesus is saying, I embodied it. What the law was pointing to, I embodied it. Paul is not saying throw the law away. No. Paul is saying, can external rule keeping produce inner transformation? That's a different question entirely. Paul never says life is bad. He points toward the same destination, awakened living. That's what grace is about, awakened living. Embodying the word, that's grace. You have to embody the word. You have to live it. Let's see it in action in you. That's what Jesus meant by I came to fulfill the law. Jesus embodied the word. And the word became flesh and dwelt among us. Be ye doers of the word, not hearers only. That's what it means to be under grace. The law as principles of life, rather than mere external regulation. This connects beautifully to Jesus. Think about Jesus' teaching. He repeatedly brings people back to life. Not merely compliance, life. He said things like, the Sabbath was made for man. The tree is known by its fruit. I came that they might have life. The emphasis remains consistent, life. If Israel represents awakened consciousness, and the children of Israel represents what flows from awakened consciousness, then this verse becomes, the expressions of awakened consciousness shall live through these principles. Not merely know them, live them, embody them, express them. This is extremely relevant today. Many people collect information, books, videos, podcasts, teachings, but information alone does not transform the house. The house changes when truth becomes lived reality. That's exactly what Leviticus is saying. The deep principle. This verse reveals the purpose behind everything that follows in Leviticus 18. These principles are not being given to restrict life. They are being given to protect life, to preserve life, to help people live in alignment with life. And that is why the verse says, he shall live in them. Because genuine truth is not meant to sit on a shelf, not meant to remain in a book, not meant to remain in a sermon. Truth becomes complete when it becomes life. The restored house lives in it. The awakened consciousness lives in it. The children of Israel, the expressions of awakened awareness, live in it. And that is the foundation upon which the rest of Leviticus 18 will now unfold. Now we get to the interesting verses. It starts from verse 6. Let's see what it's saying. None of you shall approach to any that is near of kin to him to uncover their nakedness. I am the Lord. Nakedness frequently symbolizes vulnerability, trust, exposure. What is private? What has been entrusted to your care? The chapter begins with people who are close to you, not strangers, not enemies, people who trusted you, people who gave you access, people who allowed you to see parts of their lives others never saw. The closer someone is to you, the more vulnerability they usually share with you. And the more vulnerability they share, the greater your responsibility becomes. Friendship example. Two best friends tell each other everything. Their fears, their failures, their insecurities, their private struggles. Then the friendship ends. Now one of them posts screenshots, private conversations, and personal secrets online. The friendship ended, but Anna ended too. Career example. A person works closely with a mentor. The mentor teaches them, supports them, opens doors for them. Then years later, they leave the company and spend their time exposing everything they learned in confidence. The issue isn't leaving. The issue is violating trust. The principle is simple. Closeness creates responsibility. Access creates responsibility. Trust creates responsibility. Relationship example. Think about what often happens after a breakup or divorce. Two people once loved each other. They called each other my soulmate, the love of my life, my best friend. They built a life together, raised children together, supported each other through difficult seasons, sacrificed for one another, encouraged one another, helped each other become who they are. Then the relationship ends. And suddenly, one person starts a YouTube channel, or a podcast, or a social media page. And now every week, they are exposing private conversations, personal weaknesses, embarrassing moments, family secrets, and vulnerabilities. They say, he's a narcissist. She's crazy. He's useless. She's manipulative. And people watching may never stop to ask, was this not the same person you once claimed to love? Was this not the same person who supported you when you had nothing? Was this not the same person who stood beside you when nobody else did? The relationship may have ended. The marriage may have ended. The partnership may have ended. But honor should not end. Leviticus is teaching something deeper than merely maintaining a relationship. It is teaching respect for what played a role in your journey. A mature person can say, the relationship ended. We were no longer compatible. We chose different paths. There were mistakes on both sides, without turning the other person into a public enemy. Leviticus is teaching that healthy consciousness learns how to move forward without dishonoring the people, relationships, and seasons that contributed to its growth. Because growth without gratitude often becomes bitterness wearing the mask of wisdom. The hidden cost of bitterness. What many people don't realize is that bitterness often punishes the person carrying it more than the person they are attacking. Imagine someone spends years online exposing an ex. Every video is, he did this, she did that. Let me tell you what really happened. Every interview becomes a complaint. Every conversation becomes a character assassination. Every opportunity becomes another chance to expose old wounds. What they often fail to see is that other people are watching. Potential friends are watching. Potential business partners are watching. Potential spouses are watching. And many of them are thinking, if this is how they talk about someone they once loved, what would they say about me if our relationship ends? If they expose their ex's weaknesses, secrets, and vulnerabilities, why would I trust them with mine? If they speak with this much contempt about someone they once called the love of their life, what would happen if we had a disagreement? Without realizing it, bitterness becomes a warning sign. The person believes they are exposing their former partner, but often they are exposing themselves. They are revealing how they process pain, how they handle disappointment, how they respond to conflict, how they treat people after a relationship ends. A mature person understands that a relationship can end without honor ending. You can tell the truth, establish boundaries, acknowledge them, walk away, acknowledge harm, without turning someone's life into a public spectacle. This is one reason wisdom protects dignity. Not only for the other person, for you. Because the way you speak about former seasons tells future people what they can expect from you. A healed person may say, "We were not meant to continue together. I learned valuable lessons. I wish them well." A bitter person often remains emotionally tied to a relationship long after it has ended. The relationship is over, but the resentment keeps it alive. Leviticus repeatedly teaches us, release what no longer belongs in the house. Do not carry it forever. Do not build your identity around it. Do not make it your ministry. Because bitterness has a way of locking the door to future blessings, while keeping your attention fixed on a chapter that has already ended. Verse 7. The nakedness of thy father, or the nakedness of thy mother, shalt thou not uncover. She is thy mother. Thou shalt not uncover her nakedness. Throughout scripture, father often represents source, origin, foundation, that which produces. Mother often represents nature, development, that which helps life grow. Nakedness frequently symbolizes vulnerability, trust, exposure, what is private, or what has been entrusted to your care. The verse is not merely discussing physical nakedness. It is discussing how we handle the vulnerabilities of those who helped shape us. The principle becomes, do not weaponize the vulnerabilities of your foundations. Family example. Many children grow up seeing the weaknesses of their parents. Parents are human. They make mistakes. They struggle. They fail. They have flaws. The question becomes, what do you do with that knowledge? Some people spend their lives exposing and humiliating their parents. Others acknowledge the flaws while still recognizing, these are the people who helped bring me into the world. The issue isn't pretending parents are perfect. The issue is learning the difference between healing and humiliation. But father and mother are bigger than biological parents. They represent origins, foundations, sources, anything that helped produce what exists today. Career example. Imagine a company gives someone their first opportunity. They learn professionalism, communication, leadership, and technical skills. Years later, they leave. Now every conversation becomes, that company was garbage. Everyone there was incompetent. The company may not have been perfect, but it was still part of the foundation. The issue isn't leaving. The issue is contempt for the source. Church example. Someone grows up in a church. They learn prayer, service, community, and compassion. Years later, they disagree with certain teachings. That is normal. Growth is natural. But there is a difference between I have moved beyond that stage and everyone there is stupid. One reflects growth. The other reflects contempt. Friendship example. Think about a friend who supported you through difficult seasons. Perhaps they listened when nobody else would, encouraged you when you wanted to quit, helped you through heartbreak, loss, or failure. Years later, the friendship ends. Now every secret they shared becomes public content. Again, the issue isn't the ending of the friendship. The issue is dishonoring what once helped sustain you. Without the foundation, there will be no structure. Without Jacob, there would be no Israel. The deeper principle is simple. Honor the source, even when you have moved beyond the season. Verse 8. The nakedness of thy father's wife shalt thou not uncover. It is thy father's nakedness. If father represents source, origin, foundation, or that which helped produce you, then the father's wife represents what is joined to the foundation, what has been entrusted to the foundation, relationships connected to the source, sacred trust connected to the house. And if nakedness represents vulnerability, trust, exposure, or access to private matters, then the verse is no longer merely discussing a family relationship. It is teaching a principle. Do not violate the trust attached to something that helped build you. Or respect what has been entrusted to the foundations of your life. The verse ends by saying, it is thy father's nakedness. In other words, this trust does not belong to you. This vulnerability was not entrusted to you. This exposure is not yours to reveal. The chapter is teaching us to respect boundaries, to respect sacred trust, to respect what belongs to others. Family example. Imagine a child grows up hearing private conversations between parents. Perhaps they know family struggles, financial difficulties, marital challenges, and personal weaknesses. Years later, they become angry with their parents. Now they begin exposing everything to relatives, friends, and strangers. The information may be true, but truth and wisdom are not always the same thing. The issue is not whether the information is accurate. The issue is whether it was entrusted to them to expose. The chapter asks, what do you do with access that came through relationship? Marriage example. Two people marry. They share everything. Dreams, fears, weaknesses, failures, embarrassing moments, private struggles. Then the marriage ends. Now one person starts making videos, posting screenshots, sharing private conversations, exposing vulnerabilities. People watching often think, if this is how they treat someone they once called the love of their life, how would they treat me? The marriage ended, but Anna should not have ended. The relationship changed, but dignity should remain. Friendship example. A best friend knows things nobody else knows. They know your fears, your insecurities, your mistakes, and your struggles. Years later, the friendship ends. Now every confidence becomes content. Every secret becomes ammunition. Every vulnerable moment becomes public entertainment. The friendship ended, but trust was still violated. Career example. Imagine a company gives someone their first opportunity. A manager mentors them. A team trains them. Leaders invest in them. As a result, they gain access to internal discussions, company weaknesses, confidential information, and private challenges. Years later, they leave. Now they spend years exposing everything they learned while inside. Again, the issue isn't leaving. People leave jobs all the time. The issue is violating trust. The issue is weaponizing access. Church example. Someone serves in a church for years. Because they are trusted, they gain access to leadership meetings, personal struggles, private conversations, and challenges within the community. Then they leave. Instead of moving forward, they dedicate themselves to exposing everything they learned while they were trusted. The issue isn't disagreement. The issue is stewardship. The issue is how they handle information that was never theirs to expose. The deep principle. This verse teaches that not everything you know belongs to you. Not everything you see belongs to the public. Not everything entrusted to you should be exposed. The greater the relationship, the greater the responsibility. The greater the access, the greater the stewardship. Awakened consciousness understands something many people forget. Access is a privilege, not a weapon. And that is why the verse says, it is thy father's nakedness. Because some vulnerabilities belong to relationships that are not yours to expose. Some trusts are not yours to violate. Some boundaries exist to protect the integrity of the house. A restored house remains healthy when it honors trust long after the season that created the trust has ended. Verse 9. The nakedness of thy sister, the daughter of thy father, or daughter of thy mother, whether she be born at home or born abroad, even their nakedness thou shalt not uncover. If father represents source, origin or foundation, and mother represents nurture, development or growth, then a sister represents someone who grew alongside you, someone who shared part of your journey, someone who knows your story, someone who witnessed your struggles and victories, someone who understands parts of your life that outsiders never saw. And if nakedness represents vulnerability, trust, exposure, what is private, or what has been entrusted to your care, then the verse is teaching a powerful principle. Do not weaponize the vulnerabilities of those who walked the journey with you. Or do not turn shared history into public exposure. Whether born at home or born abroad. This is an interesting detail. The verse goes out of its way to say, whether she be born at home or born abroad. The principle remains the same. The trust remains the same. The responsibility remains the same. Whether someone grew up beside you from childhood or entered your life later, if trust was established, honor is still required. The chapter is teaching that stewardship is not determined by how long someone was in your life. It is determined by how much trust existed within the relationship. Family example. Brothers and sisters often know things nobody else knows. They know childhood mistakes, embarrassing moments, family struggles, insecurities, fears, and painful experiences. Then a family dispute happens. Perhaps there is an inheritance disagreement, a conflict over property, a disagreement between relatives. Suddenly, years of private information becomes public. Family secrets are exposed. Embarrassing stories are shared. Weaknesses are discussed with strangers. The issue isn't the disagreement. Families disagree all the time. The issue is turning shared history into a weapon. Friendship example. Many people have witnessed this. Two best friends spend years together. They call each other my sister, my brother, my best friend. They know each other's fears, failures, dreams, insecurities, and private struggles. Then the friendship ends. Now screenshots are posted. Voice notes are shared. Private conversations become public content. What makes people uncomfortable isn't necessarily the information, it's the betrayal of trust. People watching often think, if they can do this to their best friend, what would they do to me? The friendship ended, but Anna should not have ended. Relationship example. A couple shares years of life together. They know each other's weaknesses, fears, insecurities, and private struggles. The relationship ends. Now every vulnerability becomes content. Every private conversation becomes a story. Every weakness becomes public discussion. Again, the issue isn't the breakup. The issue is taking what was entrusted to you and using it against the person who entrusted it. The relationship may be over, but dignity should remain. Career example. Think about co-workers who rise together. They start at the same company, learn together, struggle together, support one another. They know each other's challenges because they lived through them together. Then one gets promoted. A disagreement develops. A partnership ends. Now one begins exposing everything they know about the other. Again, the issue isn't the disagreement. The issue is violating trust that was built through shared experience. Church example. Many people serve together for years. They pray together, volunteer together, support one another through difficult seasons. They know each other's struggles because they walked through them together. Then conflict arises. People leave. Relationships change. Now former friends begin exposing private conversations and personal matters. The issue isn't leaving. The issue is turning trust into ammunition. The deep principle. This verse teaches that shared history creates stewardship. The people who walked with you often know things others never will. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? Will you protect it? Or will you weaponize it? Awakened consciousness understands that closeness is a privilege. Trust is a privilege. Access is a privilege. And privileges carry responsibilities. Perhaps that is why the verse speaks of a sister. Because a sister represents someone who shared part of your story. Someone who grew alongside you. Someone who knows your journey. The relationship may change. The season may end. The paths may separate. But Anna remains a choice. And a restored house remains healthy when it protects the dignity of those who walked the journey with it. Verse 10. The nakedness of thy son's daughter, or of thy daughter's daughter, even their nakedness thou shalt not uncover, for theirs is thy own nakedness. A father represents source, origin or foundation, and mother represents nurture or development. And sister represents those who grew alongside you. Then children and grandchildren represent what comes from you, your legacy, your influence, the fruit of your life, future generations, those entrusted to your care. And if nakedness represents vulnerability, trust, exposure, what is private, or what has been entrusted to you, then this verse introduces a new principle. Do not expose the vulnerabilities of those who came from you, or protect the dignity of those entrusted to your care. Notice the reason given. For theirs is thy own nakedness. That is a profound statement. Because the verse is teaching that what affects them affects you. Their story is connected to your story. Their dignity is connected to your dignity. Their wounds are connected to your stewardship. The fruit remains connected to the tree. The legacy remains connected to the source. Family example. Many parents spend years exposing their children to friends, to relatives, to co-workers, to family friends, even to complete strangers. They say things like, my son is lazy. My daughter is difficult. My child never gets anything right. My son is a disappointment. My daughter always makes mistakes. Meanwhile, the people listening also have children. Their children have flaws. Their children make mistakes. Their children struggle, but they don't expose them. Why? Because they understand something. When you constantly shame your child, you are not only exposing the child, you are exposing the house. You are exposing your stewardship. You are exposing the environment that helped shape them. The child is not separate from the story. The child is part of the story. That does not mean children are perfect. Far from it. Everyone has weaknesses. Everyone makes mistakes. But there is a difference between correction and humiliation. Correction seeks growth. Humiliation seeks exposure. And many children grow up remembering not the correction, but the shame. What many parents fail to realize is that public humiliation often creates distance rather than closeness. The child learns, I am not safe here. And over time, trust disappears. Communication disappears. Vulnerability disappears. Then years later, the parent wonders, why don't my children talk to me anymore? The relationship did not break in a single day. It broke through repeated violations of trust. Leadership example. Think about a teacher, a mentor, a coach, a leader. They help someone grow, guide them, train them, invest in them. Then the student makes mistakes. If the leader constantly humiliates the student publicly, people begin questioning the leader as well. Why? Because the student's development reflects the environment that produced them. The fruit and the tree remain connected. Church example. Imagine a pastor constantly embarrassing members of the congregation from the pulpit, exposing their failures, discussing private matters publicly, humiliating people in front of others. The issue isn't correction. The issue is exposure. The issue is violating trust. A healthy spiritual community corrects people without destroying their dignity. Career example. Imagine a manager who constantly humiliates employees. Every mistake becomes public. Every failure becomes public entertainment. Every weakness becomes office gossip. Soon, employees stop sharing struggles. Stop asking questions. Stop trusting leadership. Because people grow best where dignity is protected. The deep principle. This verse teaches that what comes from you is connected to you, your children, your students, your employees, your mentees, your community, your legacy. The question is, how do you handle the vulnerabilities of those entrusted to your care? Do you protect them or do you expose them? Do you guide them or do you humiliate them? Awakened consciousness understands something many people forget. The weaknesses of those entrusted to you are not opportunities for public exposure. They are opportunities for wisdom, for guidance, for correction, for growth. That is why the verse says, "For theirs is thine own nakedness." Because when you expose what was entrusted to your care, you often reveal more about your stewardship than about their weakness. A restored house protects the dignity of those who came from it, while helping them become everything they were created to be. Verse 11. The nakedness of thy father's wife's daughter, begotten of thy father, she is thy sister, thou shalt not uncover her nakedness. If father represents source, origin, or foundation, and father's wife represents what is connected to the foundation, relationships attached to the source, or trust attached to the house, and sister represents those who grew alongside you, those who shared part of your journey, or those who know your story. And if nakedness represents vulnerability, trust, exposure, what is private, or what has been entrusted to your care, then this verse expands the principle even further. Notice that this is not simply someone who shares your journey. This is someone connected to your journey through relationships that existed before you. In other words, respect the vulnerabilities of people who became part of your story through the connections of life. Or do not weaponize trust simply because a relationship structure changed. The chapter keeps widening the circle. Why repeat she is thy sister? The verse says, she is thy sister. This is important because scripture keeps reminding us. Remember the relationship before you focus on the disagreement. Remember the connection before you focus on the conflict. Remember the humanity before you focus on the flaw. Many people become so consumed by present conflict that they completely forget years of relationship. Leviticus keeps pulling us back to remembrance. Blended family example. A child grows up in a blended family. Step brothers, step sisters, half siblings, people who may not share every part of the same history, but still shared life together. They celebrate holidays together, share meals together, experience life together, know things outsiders never know. Then years later, a family conflict develops, an inheritance dispute, a disagreement, a misunderstanding. Suddenly, private stories become public. Family secrets become ammunition. Past vulnerabilities become weapons. The issue is not the disagreement. The issue is taking access that came through relationship and using it to wound. Friendship example. Sometimes people enter your life through someone else. Perhaps a friend introduces you to another friend. Years later, that person becomes like family. You spend years together. They trust you. You trust them. Then a conflict arises. Now everything they once shared becomes public content. The chapter asks, was the trust only valuable while the friendship benefited you? Or was it valuable because it was trust? Marriage example. Think about in-laws, extended family, people who become part of your life because of a marriage. Over time, they trust you. You become part of family gatherings, part of private conversations, part of difficult seasons. Then the marriage ends. Many people begin exposing everything they learned about the family. The issue is not that the marriage ended. The issue is treating trust as if it expires when a relationship changes. Leviticus is teaching that Anna should survive the ending of a season. Church example. This happens frequently in spiritual communities. Someone joins a church. Because of trust, they gain access to personal struggles, leadership challenges, private conversations, and difficult situations. Years later, they leave. Now they expose everything they learned. The issue is not departure. The issue is stewardship. The trust existed because relationship existed. The relationship may have changed, but integrity should remain. Career example. Imagine joining a company through a mentor. Because of that relationship, you gain access to leadership discussions, company struggles, and private challenges. You were welcomed into rooms because trust existed. Years later, you leave. Now you expose everything you learned. Again, the issue isn't leaving. The issue is violating trust that was never yours to own. The access came through relationship. The relationship created responsibility. The deep principle. This verse teaches that not all trust originates directly. Sometimes, trust comes through relationships, through family, through friendship, through marriage, through mentorship, through community. The question is, how do you handle the vulnerabilities you gain access to through those relationships? Do you protect them or do you weaponize them? Awakened consciousness understands that access gained through relationship is still sacred. The relationship may change. The season may end. The paths may separate, but Anna remains a choice. That is why the verse says, she is thy sister. Because before you expose someone's vulnerabilities, remember the relationship that gave you access to them in the first place. A restored house remains healthy when it protects the dignity of those whose trust entered its life through relationship. Verse 12. Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy father's sister. She is thy father's near kinswoman. If father represents source, origin, or foundation, and father's sister represents those connected to your foundation, people who were part of the environment that helped shape you, people who contributed to the house before you arrived, or those whose lives are intertwined with your origins. And if nakedness represents vulnerability, trust, exposure, private matters, or information entrusted to your care, then this verse introduces another layer to the principle. Honor the vulnerabilities of those connected to your foundations, or do not expose the people who helped build the environment that helped build you. The chapter continues expanding outward. We began with your foundations, then those connected to the foundations, then those who grew alongside you. Now we move to those who were part of the larger structure surrounding the foundation itself. She is thy father's near kinswoman. Notice the reason given. The verse doesn't focus on her accomplishments, her failures, her strengths, or her weaknesses. It focuses on relationship, connection, kinship. The chapter keeps reminding us, remember the relationship before you expose the vulnerability. Remember the contribution before you focus on the flaw. Remember the humanity before you focus on the mistake. Family example. Many people have an aunt, uncle, or older relative who played a role in their upbringing. Perhaps they babysat you, supported your parents, helped during difficult seasons, provided guidance, contributed to the family in ways you didn't fully appreciate until later. Like everyone else, they are imperfect. They have flaws, weaknesses, mistakes, and private struggles. The question becomes, what do you do with that knowledge? Many people spend years exposing the flaws of relatives while forgetting the role those same relatives played in helping the family survive difficult seasons. The issue is not acknowledging flaws. The issue is reducing a person's entire contribution to their weaknesses. This is very relatable in many families. An aunt may have helped raise children. An uncle may have paid school fees. A relative may have opened their home when times were difficult. Years later, a disagreement occurs. Suddenly, all anyone talks about are the person's weaknesses. Their mistakes become public discussion. Their struggles become gossip. Their failures become entertainment. What gets forgotten is that the same person being exposed may have been one of the people who helped hold the family together during difficult times. The chapter calls us to remember the whole story, not just the floor. Friendship example. Sometimes friends support us during seasons when nobody else does. They may lend money, provide encouragement, help us through loss, support us through hardship. Years later, the friendship ends. Now the person's weaknesses become the main topic of conversation. What gets forgotten is the contribution. The chapter reminds us not to let present disappointment erase past value. Church example. Many people leave churches, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes because they have genuinely outgrown a particular stage. But there is a difference between I have moved on and let me expose every flaw of everyone who was there. Many former members spend years discussing the weaknesses of pastors, leaders, and members. Yet they often forget that those same people may have supported them through some of the most difficult periods of their lives. The issue is not departure. The issue is dishonoring the contribution. Career example. Think about a former manager. Perhaps they weren't perfect. Most managers aren't. Maybe they made mistakes. Maybe they had weaknesses. But they also hired you, trained you, gave you opportunities, believed in you when others didn't. Years later, many people focus only on the flaws. The chapter invites us to remember the entire picture, to acknowledge imperfection without erasing contribution. The deep principle. This verse teaches that people connected to our foundations deserve the same stewardship of dignity that we extend to the foundations themselves. Not because they are perfect, but because they play their role. Awakened consciousness understands that every human being is more than their worst moment, more than their greatest mistake, more than the flaw everyone talks about. The question becomes, will you focus only on the weakness? Or will you remember the contribution as well? That is why the verse reminds us, she is thy father's near kinswoman. Remember the connection. Remember the role. Remember the relationship. Because a restored house remains healthy when it refuses to reduce people to their flaws and learns to honor the contributions they made along the journey. Verse 13. Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy mother's sister, for she is thy mother's near kinswoman. If mother represents nature, development, growth, support, or that which helps life mature, and the mother sister represents people connected to what nurtured you, those who contributed to your growth, those who supported the environment that supported you, or those who helped sustain the house. And if nakedness represents vulnerability, trust, exposure, private matters, or information entrusted to your care, then the principle becomes, honor the vulnerabilities of those who contributed to your growth. or do not expose the weaknesses of those who help nurture the life you now enjoy. Notice that this verse mirrors the previous one. Verse 12 focuses on the father's side. Now verse 13 focuses on the mother's side. Why? Because wisdom is not selective. Honor is not selective. The principle applies everywhere. The difference between a flaw and a contribution. One of the easiest mistakes people make is reducing someone to their flaws, especially after conflict, after disappointment, after relationships change. Leviticus keeps pushing us to see the whole picture, not just the weakness, but the contribution as well. Family example. There is often an auntie, grandmother, or older woman in the family who quietly supports everyone. She may care for children, provide financial help, house relatives, cook for family gatherings, or help during emergencies. Then years later, a disagreement happens. Suddenly, everyone is discussing her faults. People forget the years of sacrifice, the years of support, the years of service. The chapter challenges us to remember the whole story, not just the part that supports our present frustration. Friendship example. Think about a friend who stood beside you during a difficult season. Perhaps when you were unemployed, heartbroken, grieving, or struggling financially. They listened, encouraged, supported. Years later, the friendship ends. Now their weaknesses become the focus. The chapter asks, have you forgotten what they contributed simply because the season changed? Church example. Many people leave churches and later focus exclusively on what was wrong. Suddenly, some problems may have existed. Every community has imperfections. But often, people forget who prayed for them, who encouraged them, who supported them, who helped them through difficult periods. The issue is not acknowledging flaws. The issue is allowing flaws to erase every contribution. Career example. Think about a manager, trainer, or mentor. Perhaps they were imperfect. Perhaps they made mistakes, but they also trained you, invested in you, opened opportunities for you, taught you valuable skills. Years later, some people speak as though none of that ever happened. The chapter calls us back to balance, to honesty, to remembering the whole story. The deep principle. This verse teaches that people who contributed to our growth deserve more than being remembered only for their mistakes. Not because they are perfect, but because they are human and because their contribution matters. Awakened consciousness learns how to acknowledge flaws without erasing gratitude, how to recognize mistakes without forgetting contribution. How to move forward without dishonoring the people who helped sustain earlier seasons of life. That is why the verse says, she is thy mother's near kinswoman. Remember the connection. Remember the support. Remember the contribution. Because a restored house remains healthy when it remembers that people are more than their weaknesses and more than their worst moments. Verse 14. Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy father's brother. Thou shalt not approach to his wife, she is thy aunt. A father represents source, origin or foundation. And the father's brother represents those who helped build the foundation, those who stood alongside the source, people who contributed to the structure before you arrived, or fellow builders of the house. And if the wife represents trust attached to that relationship, vulnerabilities connected to that person, or what has been entrusted to that household. And nakedness represents vulnerability, exposure, trust, private matters, or information entrusted to your care. Then the principle becomes, do not violate the trust connected to those who helped build your foundation, or respect the dignity of those who stood alongside the people who helped shape your life. Notice something important. The verse doesn't simply stop at the father's brother. It includes his wife. Why? Because the chapter is showing us that trust extends beyond individuals. Trust extends into relationships, into households, into communities, into the wider network connected to the foundation. Thou shalt not approach. This phrase appears again and is significant because most betrayals do not begin with exposure. They begin with crossing boundaries. The chapter repeatedly moves upstream. Long before trust is broken publicly, boundaries are usually ignored privately. Long before vulnerabilities are exposed, respect for the relationship has often disappeared. Leviticus keeps teaching, protect the boundary before you create the wound. Family example. This is very common in many families. An uncle may have helped raise nieces and nephews. He may have supported the extended family for years. Then a conflict happens, perhaps over money, property, inheritance, or a misunderstanding. Suddenly, years of contribution disappear from the conversation. Now, all anyone talks about are his faults. The chapter asks us, have you forgotten everything they built because of one disagreement? Friendship example. Think about someone who stood beside your friend group for years. Perhaps they organized events, supported others, encouraged people during hard times. Then conflict develops. Now people begin discussing private struggles and weaknesses. The friendship may have changed, but that doesn't make exposure honorable. Church example. A church leader, elder, or volunteer may spend years serving a community, helping people, supporting families, encouraging growth. Then one mistake or disagreement happens. Suddenly, years of service disappear from memory. Now all anyone talks about is the failure. The chapter teaches us to see the whole story, not just the flaw. Career example. Imagine a senior employee who helped train dozens of people. Perhaps they weren't perfect, no leader is. But they invested years helping others grow. Then conflict develops. Now people begin exposing every weakness they have. The chapter reminds us that contribution still matters, even when imperfections are present. The deep principle. This verse teaches that we should not allow present conflict to erase past contribution. Not because people are perfect, but because people are more than their flaws. Awakened consciousness learns how to acknowledge mistakes without reducing a person's entire life to those mistakes. It learns how to establish boundaries without dishonoring dignity. It learns how to tell the truth without weaponizing vulnerability. Perhaps that is why the verse expands from the father's brother to his wife as well. Because trust doesn't exist in isolation. Relationships create networks of responsibility. And a restored house remains healthy when it honors the dignity of those who helped build it, even when disagreement, disappointment, or conflict enters the story. Verse 15. Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy daughter-in-law. She is thy son's wife. Thou shalt not uncover her nakedness. If son represents what comes from you, your legacy, your influence, the next generation, the fruit of your life, and a daughter-in-law represents someone welcome into the house, someone who became family through trust, someone who joined the legacy, someone who was accepted into the circle. And if nakedness represents vulnerability, trust, exposure, private matters, information entrusted to your care, then the principle becomes protect the dignity of those who have been welcomed into your life. Or do not weaponize the vulnerabilities of people who entered your house through trust. This verse introduces an important shift. Earlier verses focus on foundations, origins, those who helped build the house. Now the focus moves to those who were welcomed into the house. The question becomes, how do you treat people after they become part of your family, community, organization, or life? She is thy son's wife. Notice the reason given. The verse reminds us of the relationship. Again and again, Leviticus keeps saying, remember who this person is. Remember the connection. Remember the trust. Remember how they entered your life. Because when relationships become strained, people often forget the history and focus only on the conflict. Family example. A woman marries into a family. She leaves her own household and joins another. She trusts. She becomes vulnerable. She shares her struggles, her fears, her dreams. She tries to become part of the family. Then years later, conflict develops. Perhaps the marriage struggles. Perhaps a divorce occurs. Perhaps there is family tension. Now private matters become public discussion. Family members expose things they learned while she trusted them. The issue is not the disagreement. The issue is violating trust that was created through relationship. In-law example. Many people have seen this happen. Someone is warmly welcomed when the relationship is good. Everyone says, "You are family now." Then the relationship changes. Now the same people begin exposing weaknesses, criticizing private matters, and speaking dishonorably. The chapter challenges this inconsistency. If someone was family when things were good, dignity should not disappear when things become difficult. Church example. Think about someone who joins a church. They become part of the community. They share their struggles, ask for prayer, open up about personal challenges. Over time, they become trusted members of the house. Then they leave. Now, private matters shared in confidence become public discussion. The issue isn't departure. The issue is violating the trust that existed while they were part of the family. Career example. Imagine a company hires someone and says, "Welcome to the team." The employee trusts leadership, shares ideas, discusses challenges, works through weaknesses. Years later, they leave. Now, former leaders discuss their private struggles with others. Most people instinctively recognize that something is wrong because trust was extended under the assumption of protection. Friendship example. A close friend is introduced into your circle. Over time, they become like family. They share personal struggles, private experiences, deep vulnerabilities. Then the friendship changes. Now those same vulnerabilities become topics of conversation. Again, the issue isn't the ending of the friendship. The issue is the betrayal of trust. Everyday life example. Imagine inviting someone into your home. You tell them, "Make yourself comfortable." You welcome them. They become part of the family. Over time, they trust you with personal information. Would it be honorable to use that information against them once the relationship changes? Most people instinctively know the answer. No. Because hospitality creates responsibility. Welcome creates responsibility. Trust creates responsibility. The deep principle. This verse teaches that being welcomed into the house should increase protection, not increase exposure. The closer someone becomes to the family, the more carefully their dignity should be handled. Awakened consciousness understands that trust is sacred. Whether the person entered through marriage, friendship, community, work, mentorship, or faith, the principle remains the same. The relationship may change. The season may end. The paths may separate. But dignity should remain protected. That is why the verse says, "She is thy son's wife." Remember how she entered the house. Remember the trust that was extended. Remember the humanity behind the relationship. Because a restored house is not measured by how it treats people when they arrive. It is measured by how it treats them when relationships become difficult. And a healthy house protects the dignity of those it once welcomed within its walls. Verse 16. Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy brother's wife. It is thy brother's nakedness. If brother represents someone who walks alongside you, a peer, a companion on the journey, or someone who shares part of your story, and a brother's wife represents trust attached to your brother's life, relationships connected to those closest to you, or vulnerabilities that became visible because of your connection to someone else. And if nakedness represents vulnerability, trust, exposure, private matters, or what was entrusted to your care, then the principle becomes, do not violate trust that came through someone else's trust. Or just because you have access does not mean you have ownership. This verse introduces one of the most important lessons in relationships. Not all access belongs to you. Sometimes you know things because someone trusted you enough to let you into their circle. That access is a privilege, not a weapon. It is thy brother's nakedness. This phrase is powerful. Notice what the verse says. It does not say it is your nakedness. It says it is thy brother's nakedness. In other words, the trust belongs to someone else. The vulnerability belongs to someone else. The story belongs to someone else. You may know it, but it is not yours to expose. This principle applies far beyond family relationships. Family example. Imagine two brothers grow up together. One brother marries. Over the years, the family becomes close. Private matters are discussed. Struggles are shared. Challenges become known. Then conflict arises. Now family members begin discussing private matters that were only known because trust existed. The issue isn't the conflict. The issue is forgetting that some information was never theirs to expose. Friendship example. A close friend introduces you to someone important in their life. Perhaps a spouse, a partner, a family member, or another trusted friend. Over time, you become part of the circle. You hear private struggles. You learn personal details. You gain access. Then the friendship ends. Now everything you learned becomes public conversation. The chapter reminds us, access is not ownership. Just because you know something does not mean it belongs to you. Relationship example. Many people have witnessed this. A relationship ends. Not only does the former partner begin exposing private matters, but their friends and family join in. Suddenly, everyone is discussing things they only knew because they had access through the relationship. The issue is not the breakup. The issue is violating trust that was never theirs to begin with. People instinctively recognize this as dishonorable. Church example. Someone serves closely with leadership. Because of that proximity, they gain access to private conversations, personal struggles, leadership challenges. Years later, they leave. Now they expose everything they learned. What they fail to realize is that much of what they know was entrusted to them because relationship existed. The information was never theirs to weaponize. Career example. A manager introduces an employee into leadership circles. Because of that trust, the employee gains access to strategic discussions, company struggles, confidential matters. Years later, they leave. Now they expose everything they learned. Again, the issue is not leaving. The issue is violating trust that was extended through relationship. Everyday life example. Imagine a friend invites you into their home. You become close to their family. You learn things outsiders never know. Years later, the friendship changes. Would it be honorable to take everything you learned and share it publicly? Most people immediately recognize the answer, no. Because the information was entrusted to you through relationship. The deep principle. This verse teaches that not everything you know belongs to you. Some information comes through borrowed trust. Some access comes through borrowed relationship. Some vulnerabilities become visible only because someone welcomed you into their world. The question becomes, what will you do with that access? Will you protect it or will you weaponize it? Awakened consciousness understands that access is a privilege. Trust is a responsibility. And borrowed trust carries borrowed responsibility. That is why the verse says, it is thy brother's nakedness. Because some stories are not yours to tell. Some vulnerabilities are not yours to expose. Some trust is not yours to violate. And a restored house remains healthy when it honors the dignity of people long after the relationships that created that trust have changed. Part A ends here. We will finish up tomorrow. Thanks for listening and have a good night.